There's a potential hurricane in the Gulf right now known as Tropical Storm Debby, expected to become a hurricane as it intensifies and goes up the state and hits landfall. When you live in Florida, you get used to hurricanes. And I want to just talk about hurricanes and living in Florida. What's the whole perspective of the idea of what we need to know when we think about hurricanes in Florida? Now, I've been a resident of Florida actually for about 42 years now, and I've gone through a lot of hurricanes, and yes, I'm used to hurricanes, and not everybody is. A lot of people are concerned if they haven't gone through this process, what is it like to live in a hurricane? And there's always that question when we hear that there's a storm out there in the Gulf, or hitting Florida for that matter, should we stay or should we go? Where do we go in the threat of a potential hurricane? Well, I'm on Siesta Key right now, and I'll show you some aerial footage of what this looks like without a hurricane, and then I'm going to provide some B-roll on what it looks like today. And you're going to see the big concerns with a hurricane are number one, flooding, and number two, wind, right? That's a big concern when you live in Florida. And planning that out. So if you're moving here, what do you need to be concerned with if you're concerned with, I don't want to live in an area that has hurricanes? Well, welcome to the tropics. Living in Florida, it's very green, and everything you plants abundantly, and we have hurricanes, and we need hurricanes. We need hurricanes for the water, and we need hurricanes to keep our tropics as beautiful as they are, but it is a downside to living here. So hurricanes, I grew up in California, and I got used to earthquakes, and that became very normal for me as a kid. Ever since I was little, we had earthquake drills, and we actually had a very big earthquake when I was in middle school, and I was prepared, and my parents weren't because they didn't go through the same earthquake training that I did. But after that point, after you have an earthquake, there's aftershocks, and that lasts for days. And then after you go through a big earthquake, they all seem very small, right? I mean, after you go through a 5 or a 6, a 3-point something doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. And that's kind of what happened when we lived out there, is we actually got used to earthquakes. But earthquakes, you have no warning. You have no concept that they're coming, and you have to kind of always be on guard that that it could happen at any time, and it could be devastating. Not so much in Florida. Hurricanes, of course, can be very devastating here, but we have warning that they're coming, and that's a big deal. So when you come here and you have the fear factor that, whoa, what is this going to look like? Am I going to be hurt in a hurricane? Well, you have warning. You have warning that they're coming. Like now, we have a tropical storm out there. You can see what it's doing to the Gulf. And where is this tropical storm going to hit? Who knows? The normal protocol is the newscast starts showing you all these spaghetti models of where a hurricane could land, and you have to be prepared. And I've learned to never trust them. Ideally, you're in Florida. If there's a hurricane named in the Gulf, it could go anywhere. And I think the biggest example of that is there was back in the day of Hurricane Charlie. Hurricane Charlie was supposed to hit Tampa, and we were ready for it to hit Tampa. Tampa was all boarded up. I owned a lot of real estate, or actually owned 2 houses in Port Charlotte at that time. And when Charlie came up the Gulf, for no reason, or from my perspective, it immediately took a right and hit right into the landfall. That was not the projection that everyone was seeing. And as a result, we had left part of Florida. We went north because it was supposed to hit Tampa. We thought we don't want to be in Sarasota if a hurricane's going to hit Tampa. So we actually went to the North State and then bunkered down. But Hurricane Charlie, as it came up, it immediately took a right and went right into Port Charlotte. And I owned 2 homes at that time. I was thinking, there goes my homes, right? What is that going to look like? It's going to devastate the homes. And it was interesting going back after the hurricane to see what happens. And a year plus ago, we had Ian that hit Fort Myers, and that was very devastating. And the devastating aspect of Ian was the flooding, was just the storm surge. A lot of people thought it was the wind. No, it was the water coming in. Now, Fort Myers, to be fair, I've known Fort Myers since I was a teenager, and I've gone down to Fort Myers, and Fort Myers was very cool. It was neat. What was neat about Fort Myers the beach especially was the aspect that you had all these wood structures, and it was kind of a shacky, beachy, fun thing, more of a teenager vibe kind of place, a lot of t-shirt shops, and a lot of old structures were on Fort Myers. Well, when Ian came through and the storm surge went through Fort Myers, it took them out. And now when you look at Fort Myers and you look at an aerial, you can see that it's been scalped. I mean, a lot of Fort Myers has been cleared out. Is this good? I don't know. I think Fort Myers will never be the same, but that's the concern with a hurricane. And I think about when I was in elementary school, there was this book about the big bad wolf. You know, I'm going to huff and puff and blow your house down, and if you build it out of straw or stick, I'm going to devastate you. But if you build it out of block, I don't have a chance. And that was, you know, the essence of this book, right? This wolf coming in and trying to blow this house down, and the creatures kept making it stronger and stronger. But when they built it out of block, the wolf couldn't blow their house down. So the wolf is this hurricane. The big bad wolf we have in Florida is hurricanes. Hurricanes come through, they blow through, the waters come through, and they cause damage. However, if you build a good home, you're going to have that challenge. Now, as much of that challenge, and we can see that right now with Fort Myers, because when you go to Fort Myers, when the storm surge came through the island and the water and the wind, the homes that were built very well down there did very well. They are still here, and they're built up, they're built to block, and they're made hurricane resistant. So the sad thing with Fort Myers, the reality is the properties that were not hurricane resistant in Fort Myers were demolished, and they were gone. And that's the big concern. So when you come to Florida, obviously think this one out. If you're going to buy a property or build a property, it needs to be hurricane resistant. That would seem obvious, right? And if it's not, and you're living right on the beach in a wood frame structure, yes, you're going to have problems. You need to leave, right? So when you're in Florida and there's a hurricane coming, should you stay, should you go? I've done both. The challenge with leaving Florida is it's not so easy. The longer you wait to leave in a hurricane, the harder it is to leave, because gas stations run out of gas. The interstate is just inundated. It becomes a parking lot, and everyone's trying to leave at the same time at the last minute. Not a good strategy if you're here. So we actually, the last time I left Florida in a hurricane, just decided we're going to leave at midnight, because who else is going to leave in the middle of the night to go leave our state? Well, a lot of people thought that was a good idea too. And we did get out of the state, but it wasn't an easy process. We had to bring gas tanks with us. We had strategically had to figure out how to make sure that we had enough gas to leave the state. And it was an ordeal, and it was even a bigger ordeal to come back into Florida after a hurricane came through. So the next notice we had of a hurricane, I just decided to stay. And that was Hurricane Ian. And that was a big deal for Sarasota, because that's the hurricane that hit Fort Myers. So we saw a lot of effects coming into Sarasota. And I was home with my dog and cat, and my lady, she just said, no, I'm out of here. So she had actually left some time earlier. But I stayed home and through this hurricane, and it was just a huge windstorm all night. I kept seeing my tree sway and hit the windows, and I felt like I was going to lose a window and it wasn't going to be good. But I'm very fortunate. My home is made out of block. It's very high and no flooding. That is a big issue here. So the house survived, but when the hurricane was over with, the next day, the whole neighborhood, there were a lot of trees were down, the roads were impassable, there were a lot of wet areas, and a lot of people don't think about that. You know, if you're going to go through a hurricane, you're going to stay, you need to be prepared to stay. And what does that mean, be prepared to stay? Now, the big aspect is after the hurricane, I was still stuck in the house. I couldn't go anywhere. Understand, all the gas stations were empty, so there was no chance of getting gas. And this lasted for about a week. So even though I was safe in my house a week, and we didn't have any damage to our home and our area, I still couldn't leave because I had no access. I had no gas. I didn't have the backups for supplies, so I needed to make sure that I was well stocked for the home. So when is the right time to stock up for a home? It's not when you know there's a hurricane coming. That's just too late. Or it's not after the fact, because you're not going to get supplies. If you live in Florida, you have to think about this. Just like the idea that you could have a hurricane or you could have an earthquake anytime in California, you have to plan for the worst. And how do you plan for the worst? You supply up. And you need lots of everything, right? You need lots of TP, you need lots of canned foods if you run out of electricity. And you need to be prepared to survive in your home for at least a week after a hurricane, because even after the hurricane, you're going to be stuck in your place if it's a bad hurricane. So I learned that lesson because the biggest problem with me was losing internet. We get so addicted to what we need, and losing internet at the house was probably my biggest challenge after the hurricane. But would I stay or go if there's a hurricane? My MO is I'm gonna stay, because I feel like I'm in a safe house, and that makes all the difference. If you're not in a safe home, if you're close to an area, or if you're in a home that's not hurricane resistant, not a good idea to stay. In fact, you need to leave. If you're on a barrier island, they will require you to leave. And if you're in an unsafe structure, such as a mobile home, you absolutely need to leave, because a hurricane, the two biggest problems are the water and the wind. Now, the water is what took Fort Myers out, the big storm surge, but the wind obviously is a big impact. When my two homes got hit down from Hurricane Charlie, it was really strange, because I went back in and the police had blocked off the city. I had to show them that I'm an owner. Please let me go see my home, and they did. But I was seeing people trying to get gas. It was hard to go back into Port Charlotte after a hurricane. And ironically, I saw that some homes were damaged and some weren't. Now, two of my homes, one, the roof, every other shingle was blown off, so the roof had to be replaced, but the house was pretty solid, and I was fortunate. But there was a house 2 houses down that they had a refrigerator on top of their roof. Like, how could that possibly happen, right? Well, when there's all that wind coming through and you have tornadoes and things that could potentially be in all that, it's a mess, and it doesn't hit evenly. It doesn't necessarily wipe everything out. It just kind of scatters. And just like now, we have these squalls of rain and then squalls of wind. So it was unusual that, I was fortunate that house was safe. My other house down there had a lot of damage because the wind blew out windows. And after the hurricane, good luck in trying to find people to fix it up, right? It actually stayed boarded up for about a year before I was able to get the right contractor to come in and replace the windows and stuff. So it's all about preparedness. Living in Florida is a great place to live. Yes, we have hurricanes and we need hurricanes, but you got to be smart about it. You got to plan for it. If you're in a safe structure, you can stay. If you're not, you absolutely should go. But being prepared is the most important aspect when you go through a hurricane here in Florida. So in closing, my name is Troy Funk. I hope I've been helpful to you. If I have, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. In closing, if you're going through this storm with me, I wish you safety, and regardless if you're in Florida or not, I wish you well.